If your finance team is taking 15 days or more to close the month-end process, that is a process problem that your team do not have to live with. It actually can be done in 2 to 3 days. I know this because I've worked with many companies where closing the books in 2 to 3 days is the standard. And the fact is, those teams are not faster or smarter than your team. These companies have actually designed the process or the month-end close process in a way that the books can be closed in 2 to 3 days. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through a step-by-step process on how you can automate your AP and procurement processes so that you can close books in 2 to 3 days without pulling all-nighters during the month-end close process. Let's get into it. So the first thing to remember is the month-end close process actually happens over the month, right, which you're trying to close, not at the end of the month. That is the key distinction between companies that are actually closing books in 2 to 3 days, is because they are actually following the process during the whole month, so that by the time they come to month-end process, all the data that they need is in one place. They are not chasing invoices in the first day of the month-end close process and asking, where are my invoices, or reaching out to different people to gather the information, or they don't know their accruals, so they're kind of building up accruals from ground up. Those are some of the key differences in what I see from working with different teams, one that are not closing fast versus the other that are closing books fast. The basics here is to start with a close calendar. A close calendar, in simple terms, is the what needs to happen before the month end process starts. So start from -5 to +5, kind of take that range and clearly define on each day what needs to happen. So for example, any follow-up for vendor invoices, or looking at open order reports, any follow-up with stakeholders, all that is happening before the month-end process starts, but you have defined that in your process and you have an assigned owner who's actually executing those step by step. So that's step one, define that calendar for your month-end close process. The second thing you want to do is move the invoice capture process before you actually start working on month-end close activities. What that means here is you want to set up a deadline by when you want all the invoices in the system. So typically what we see is companies who do not have good processes for invoice capture, when the month-end process starts, that is the time they start actually gathering the data, reaching out to different stakeholders and say, hey, do you have any invoices which you haven't processed? Or I see this purchase order, we should have received this, I do not see an invoice, or have you received it, so we can build accruals. There's a lot of those activities that needs to happen, and that all start first of all with invoice capture. So if you move the invoice capture upfront, it serves a lot of benefit downstream. What we have seen with many customers is they close it by the end of the actual month, right? So that's the last date when we're going to get the invoice in, but they are following up with vendors, following up with stakeholders much before that, so that by the month end comes, that's the absolute deadline for them to have any new invoices coming in the system. The same applies for accruals. Accruals is the expenses that has, you want to put it on your books, but you do not have an invoice, right? So that could be anything from where you receive the product, but the vendor has not sent you the invoice. Or maybe there is a potential expense that is going to happen. You're forecasting that to show up a given month, so you're going to build the accruals. The problem with accruals is it needs a lot of collaboration to understand what you really need to accrue for. And depending upon the nature of the organization, it could look very different, right? So for example, if you're a biotech company and you have a lot of CRO contracts, you have those defined milestones, but you probably also want to ask your stakeholders and say, are we really going to hit these milestones in this month, upcoming month, so we can build accruals? So it needs a lot of collaboration. So doing it fast, sooner helps a lot in closing the books. So once the calendar is set up, really what you have is two things. One is you have defined set of activities that needs to happen within a specific time frame. So you can easily say, all right, -5 to +3, whatever the time frame is, right? On each day, what needs to happen? You have defined ownership on each one of them, so that by the time you hit day 0 or day 1, you have all the data that you need to close your books. The next step I'm going to talk about, what are those key processes that you need to work on once you have all the data. So far, we kind of focused mostly on capturing all the data, right? Whether it's your invoices, whether it's your accruals, and so on. By the way, if you need the exact close calendar that can help you close books in 2 days, click on the link below where we have put a detailed 2-month close playbook that you can download for free. And in that playbook, we cover all the activities, we cover all the automation triggers that you want to focus on, and we will also cover the 7 bottlenecks that slows down your month-end close process and how to overcome that. So click on the link below. All right, let's carry on. So now you got all the information, you got a calendar. Now the actual work starts, right? The AP team need to work on all the information they have gathered to do the close. There are three major workflows I'm going to talk about and how you should think about from an automation standpoint in each one of them to speed up the process. They are invoice intake, invoice matching, and invoice exception review. And when any of this is manual, that is going to slow down your process. So let's capture each one of them. So number one is invoice capture. So most of the times what we see with growing companies, they have a process to capture the invoices. They might not have centralized the invoice capture process. Invoices can go to different stakeholders where somebody receives an invoice. It might sit in their inbox for 5 days, 10 days. They might forget about it. And when the vendor reaches out for payment, that's the time they're reaching out to AP and saying, geez, I need a payment today. And you're reacting to it at that time, right? It's not in your baby cash flow planning and things like that. So if your invoice capture process is not streamlined, and your invoices are coming through different places, it's going to slow down the process. The way to solve this is have a system through which you can automatically capture all the incoming invoices. A simple approach would be to set up an inbox where invoices can come from different sources. Typically what we have seen with our clients, what they do is they set up an inbox and then that is printed on the purchase order with specific instructions to the vendor saying you need to send invoices only to this address, otherwise you won't be paid. You also communicate that to your stakeholders internally and say, if you get an invoice from a vendor, please forward it to this. And over a period of time, you'll get to a place where your vendors are directly sending the invoices to that inbox. Now, once you receive that, the second sub-process under it is to automate the invoice creation process. So even though once you have all the invoices, you still need to enter that in your accounting system. And you might be entering it one at a time, pull the email, download the attachment, put it in a folder, then upload that into your accounting system, type in the data. It takes anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. And if you're processing 100 to 200 invoices a month, it just becomes a full-time job for someone to do it. Now, what you can do is use technology like OCR or AI that is built into systems like ProcureDesk, where it can actually pull the data from the invoice and automatically create the invoice for you. So not only it saves time, it also reduces the data entry error because, believe it or not, people are entering invoices every day. Fatigue kicks in and all of a sudden a $100 invoice might become a $1,000 invoice you didn't realize. So having technology not only just improves the efficiency, but also improves the accuracy of the data. The second workflow to match is invoice matching. So invoice matching, in very simple terms, is a standard practice that many organizations follow as a kind of a gold standard, which is to match the incoming invoice with a purchase order and a receipt. So really, this is the trifecta, right? You want to make sure that your invoice matches the quantity that you ordered and that has been received. So you're not overpaying the vendors for either A, the product that is not delivered, B, the price has changed, right? You're not overpaying them. And if the price is a problem, that's an exception, which we will talk about. When you think about doing this manually, your team is pretty much doing this side-by-side comparison, right? You got two monitors going. On one side, you have an invoice, other on a purchase order. If you have received, that's maybe you need a third monitor, but the manual looking line by line is very tedious and it's prone to errors. So what you need here is a system that can automatically match that for you. So when your month-end close process starts, assuming you have the invoice capture done automatically, your team is not focused on either A, data entry, or B, trying to figure out if this invoice matches to a purchase order or so on. Now, the third and the final workflow is exception review. So in an ideal scenario, your invoice should match your receipt and purchase order, but that generally doesn't happen, right? It could be that vendor might put in a wrong price, or maybe the price has changed. They forgot to inform to you, like after you place the order, price went up, and maybe it's something dependent on commodities, or you have never received the product, right? Whatever the case is, we call this as exceptions. Now, if you're doing this manually during your month-end close process, you received an invoice, you try to process it, and there's an exception, guess what? Now your team has to reach out to your stakeholders. So whether that is operations, whether that's, whatever marketing, they are reaching out and trying to understand, hey, there's an exception. Can you help me resolve what really happened? Because AP team doesn't have any clue in terms of what's going on in the business. They are just processing the document. So what you need here is a automation that can understand the exception and then route it to the right person for review and approval. So the way it looks in practice, for example, is, hey, there's a price exception. Okay, the price is more than what we ordered. Send it to John in purchasing. He'll look into it. Or we haven't received the product, so send it to Andrew at the warehouse team. He will look into why we haven't received it. Those are the automations that you can build in so that not only it automates the invoice matching process and exception review. But think about it this way. If you have a system that is working 24/7, by the time you get to month-end close, you really have solved for 90% of the problems. You're not starting from fresh and say, geez, let me look at what invoices are missing. Did we put all the invoices in the system? Did we match all the invoices? What are the exceptions? By this time, all that is done. What the team now has to focus on is what are the exceptions that we need to review with whom that has not been resolved so far, right? That's kind of becomes a focus. One final thing I want to talk about is that once you have automated these workflows, one thing it still doesn't solve for is generating accruals. And accruals, in our experience, is time consuming. Typically, when somebody is trying to generate a report for accruals, it involves a lot of things. Let's look at a open order report. How many purchase orders are open? Now I need to look at what was actually due to be received, but it's not invoiced, or it's invoiced but not received, right? Which means vendor has sent you the invoice, but you haven't received the product, or somebody hasn't put in the details in the system. And it needs a lot of collaboration. For example, we work with a biotech company who has this similar problem is before using ProcureDesk, they actually have to open up their contracts and look at the different milestones for the CRO contracts, and then reach out to individual stakeholder and the vendors to figure out which milestone is due this month. Are they still on target? Are they going to miss it? So they can build the accruals accordingly. Now, what changes this is having a live system that can pull all this information for you. So imagine instead of trying to gather this information from different sources, you just go to the system and system shows you an open order report with all the due milestones. It tells you what has been invoiced, what is yet to be invoiced, so you can kind of accrue for those. And it also has built-in collaboration, so you can now send a message to the vendor and say, hey, are we still on target for these milestones or not? Or it could be as simple as looking at received but not invoiced report, which tells you everything that you have received, but you haven't received the vendor invoice yet. So you can just look at the accrual amount and just create a journal entry. It's as simple as that. Or maybe there is a service invoice that is delivered, but you're waiting for confirmation. All that can be simplified by just looking at few reports, and with the click of few buttons, you actually get your accruals ready to go and create the journal entry rather than actually working with a lot of stakeholders to get all the information and then get the accruals. And once the accruals report is automated, you have pretty much automated the slowest part of the close process, right? So if you look at what we have done so far, right, we created a calendar for our month-end close. We then automated the 3 different workflows, which is capturing the invoice, matching the invoice, exception review, and fourth, we talk about how we automate the accrual process. If you do these 3 things in that sequence, you can get your close time from 10 to 15 days to 2 to 3 days very easily. Now, I just covered 3 things that you need to do to bring your close to from 15-20 days to 2 to 3 days, but it involves a lot more details. So what we have done is we have put together a free 2-day month-end playbook for you, which you can download by clicking on the link below. It covers all the exact steps which we talked about, including the calendar. We also mentioned all the automation triggers in there, like things you can look at to automate, and the 7 bottlenecks that shows up every day and how to avoid them to close books faster. Click on the link below to download that playbook now. And if you want to know more about AI and procurement, check this video.